always seems to come off as critique, even if they don't mean them that way. I have since developed a much thicker skin, I guess, from being online every week for the last 4 years.
There's a lot to criticize.
There's a lot to criticize. It's all out in the open. It's kind of like a political candidate. You know me at this point, and all of those issues are I'm aware of, and everyone else is as well. So I think as a consequence of that, I'm much more open to be like, yeah, tell me what I'm doing well, tell me what I'm doing not well. Not that this is pure evaluation, but there is a little bit of that in there. The organizing of it is another one. So I'm going to write down for me, fear, and organization. That decision making. We should teach this, know that, know this, know that. Who's next? Cliff?
Cliff Cunningham. You know everybody. Eric Senior, new gentleman.
Tim.
Tim. But anyway, so I was thrown off when I saw team teach. I was more thinking like small group team teaching, like team teaching, peer team teaching. I wasn't thinking about the grown-up
Student peer rather than instructor peer.
Gotcha.
Got it.
So anyway, and you guys know I'm just here to see what the conversations are, and of course how much it attaches to a technology, good or bad, what's out there.
Great. So I'm going to put that down specifically about how we can use tech to help coordinate. Good.
My name's Kenny. I'm a graduate student in the Kinesics department, and I've actually been TAing for a course that has 2 instructors, and it's interesting. And I think the big thing I've learned is just communication between instructors, and it doesn't always feel like there's an agreement as to where the class is and where it needs to go, and I'm just stuck in the middle.
The
Like,
frustration there, too.
you want more work, you don't. I'm kind of over here, but
I'm going to put that down as TAing and team teaching because I think TAing is a form of team teaching, but there's also this power struggle where if you're part of the team, you're this person on
Yes.
the team, right? And you really don't have much say in what's happening with
Right.
that. So yeah, let's talk about that as well. Tim?
Well, I guess the first thing comes to mind since I study music is that some of the best music teachers are not necessarily the most technically able, but they have an awesome teaching team. And I would assume that would apply for like various fields too. Your network and your resources help you succeed in delivering whatever you're trying to deliver to your students.
All right, I'm going to put that down as the role of support and success. If I can read this. Role of instructional support in success.
So that wasn't really a question. I guess the question would be how to do that.
Good. Eric?
My name is Eric Pelosa. I'm an instructional designer with UW Extended Campus, and I'm here today because of a program I'm working on. There's been a lot of discussion about team teaching, and it's kind of new for our organization. It's maybe done once or twice before. So,
And in the online space versus the face-to-face space.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of an interesting whole other dynamic.
yeah, so I'm looking for ideas how I can use Canvas, because it sounds like we are going to have to use team teaching. So I'm looking for kind of tips for stuff like that. I do have concerns, a lot of concerns about it, but mostly, the student experience. How do we ensure consistent grading if you're using team teaching? How do you alleviate student confusion about who do you contact? Who's kind of really facilitating at a specific time? Stuff like that.
Consistency in administration. Or I'll say admin duties. Good. Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Harris. I teach in Biocore, and I'm here at John's invitation I've been teaching with great partners for 20 years, and I think the quote that got me here was, "I can't imagine not team teaching."
Yeah.
Is that the one?
That was the one,
Okay.
right. And we were at a members-only event for the Teaching Academy on peer evaluation, and Michelle brought up the point of, I don't really feel like it's peer evaluation because we've been team teaching, so it's just a natural part of what we do. I mean, we get the feedback, and I can't imagine not team teaching. So I was like, get her in over here to talk about this. So thank you. Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm an instructor in the ESL program, and a lot of our programs are at least one definition of team teaching, where we have coordinators of a course who kind of design the course, and then a group of instructors who go out and teach the course, and weekly meetings to kind of keep everyone on track. It's one form of team teaching for sure. I guess my question, and I don't know if this is the right forum for it, is how to formalize it a little more. How to get into a situation of actually being able to teach with somebody else in the room and have a course designed with team teaching, because that seems to be hard to do here.
Can I put it down as structuring?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, course
Design?
Course design. I think it's more about permission, actually. It's more about getting permission to teach a class with someone else when you should each be teaching your own class. To, like course loads and teaching loads and hours and that kind of business.
I see, and that's why you say this might not be the right forum.
And that's why this might not be the, but so my other question would be definitely to do with how to coordinate that team better in terms of Canvas and what tech tools to use. That would be more this forum.
So I'm going to put the first one down as team teaching versus tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And the tradition of the one person standing in front, and not the two people having an argument in front, or whatever.
Yeah.
Excellent. Laura?
I do languages and blended online learning, and Tim, you just brought a whole nother set of concerns I have into. So I was approached by UW System because they want to start creating some collaborative degree programs in languages like French and German, Japanese, and so forth. And one of the things that I'll be doing is working with instructors to develop some of the upper level courses together, and quite possibly be teaching them together. And I hadn't even thought about the course load issue, but that's going to be a big one because it's also going to be a cross-campus one.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother concern, but just how all of that works, and whether I need to process whether it's going to be better for them to develop the courses together and have multiple sections of it, or to team teach the course itself, where they would each take, I don't know, a month and alternate, or I have no idea. But because it's blended and online, they wouldn't be physically in the same room, but they would have the same set of students.
Mm-hmm.
So they wouldn't actually be in the same room at the same time together. If that makes sense.
Lots of definitions of team teaching.
Right.
Logistics
I think it's a logistical,
Logistics, yeah.
it's a lot of logistical.
and energy is the other part of it, I think. Like, how much energy does it take to coordinate the logistics?
I'm not worried about my amount of energy for coordinating it so
yours
much
is not
as
the issue, but other people have to deal with you.
how
Yeah.
they
The other people dealing
logistically
with
coordinate. Well, that's always an issue. But
But I know that,
how
Well,
is it
it's-
best to organize and coordinate that
to
kind
me,
of thing?
that's always the kind of a larger discussion in lots of things. Is it just better for me to just do it myself, or at what point is there a value add by complicating my life, by making this happen, but the benefit of this this concerted effort pays off the cost of actually having to make it happen.
I am team teaching how to teach language courses using technology course, where my instructor, it's an all online course, and she's in Minnesota and I'm here. We designed the whole thing together. She teaches, she's the head, lead teacher for 2 weeks, and then I'm the lead teacher for 3 weeks, and I take all the credit students.
Okay. Margaret.
Hello, I am Margaret. I'm a grad student at the iSchool, and I work here with John to support the Active Teaching Lab. In my career, I have done a lot of tag team teaching on a variety of subjects, both stand-up, instructor-led training, as well as online virtual training. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about. I would say that in the classroom, it's very important to have a good rapport with your colleague who you're tag teaming with. It can be fun for the students. If there's, you've seen John and I banter a little bit, or talk to each other, tease each other a little bit. I think that's depending on the the circumstances. You'd have to regulate that. But people welcome a dynamic between the instructors. They like that, and you have to be able to, as a stand-up instructor, as many of you know, you have to be able to play to the crowd. But then when you add another instructor, you also have to sort of play to the colleague and make sure that dynamic is positive, because when it goes south, it can be very bad for everybody. Yes, Cliff, did you have a question?
It's funny because that's
or did you want my autograph?
That's
I'll
like
give you
another,
an autograph.
I want your autograph.
That's another kind of correction of my assumption here, is that when I thought about team teaching, I wasn't actually thinking about two adults in the room at the same time. Now that you're saying this, I'm assuming.
And I may not be saying that either, just for the record.
Well, actually, I was going to ask, for those who engage, if
Two
this is a
adults,
practice of yours, have you tried both? Do you do both? Do you prefer one or the other? Like, what are the pitfalls or pros and cons of that?
Both, yeah. So it can work in terms of being in the classroom at the same time, or it can work more like a relay race, where you're handing off the baton. I think it all depends upon what's best for student learning on any given day. What are the learning objectives that we want to help students achieve, and what teaching approach works best.
And Cliff, if I can add, many of the times that I've done the tag team is that, and my background is corporate training. And so we're always, type A+++, because we're on the training circuit, boom, 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 8 hours a day. And if we're not totally turned on and energized and being able to bounce off of each other and keep the people excited, that's a different dynamic, and it's a different learner need than a 50-minute class or
That or 3-hour lab.
or a 3-hour lab, but at least they're engaged, right?
That's the goal.
So I think it's a very unique role to play depending on the environment, and it may be something to have. Maybe you're going to put together like a team teaching checklist and talk about what is your role, what is my role. In the corporate training, we've done the training so many times. You do it in your sleep, and you knew the jokes you were going to say to each, it's like being a performer on a stage. You've done it so many times. You knew where you get some laughs. You knew the challenging parts of the content, so you knew where you needed to kind of get things a little bit more lively. I would suspect in a semester course, you're only teaching that a couple times a semester at most. You're not teaching it every week, right?
So I'm going to put that down as modeling, but I'm also, it visits the idea of there are many forms of team teaching, whether one's a TA, whether one's in the room at the same time with somebody else as a vaudeville act of sorts, or whether they're rotating and you take 1 week and then you take the next week, and you have to figure out the handoffs. And do you know what was taught last week, and was it taught the way that you would like it to be taught, or did Lauren go off on her own tangent? I understand. I also want to point out that we do have
That's why he's never taught with me.
a different Lauren online right now who says, "Hi, I'm a PhD candidate in planning and landscape architecture. I do not have a lot of formal classroom teaching experience, but I have co-taught adult education workshops with research partners." So that's another form in some ways. I'm interested in learning general team teaching principles and strategy. And I hope, Lauren, that I fixed the Blackboard Collaborate echo sound, because I had my mic on as well. So I turned mine off at the front of the room, and hopefully it's just this one now. And if you want to do a yes it is, that'd be great if you could add that.
What do you want me to say?
No, hopefully she heard that. She says she's hearing something with an echo, so maybe she heard it twice.
Okay.
But she heard it at least once, I
Or she
think.
heard it.
Doubly
Console.
important.
Right. All right, so let's talk about the forms, because we start talking about certain elements, we're gonna get lost in the, well, is that when you're both together, or is that when you're handing it off, or was it when you're just listening and not able to give input as a TA? What are the different forms? You talked about online partnership with a person in Minnesota. So not only are you partnering, but you're never together at the same time, I'm guessing. So have you met each other?
Yeah, so this particular person, she and I actually 1,000 years ago were in grad school together. So we've known each other for a long time. We've done regular conference presentations together. We know how we work.
You know how you'd be on
Right,
stage together at
right.
the same time.
Exactly.
Very good.
And we did follow each other's weeks, so I knew what, and so like if she was the primary instructor for a week, we were both assigned a certain number of groups within the discussion groups were separated, the students were separated into discussion groups. So I was watching these 3 groups and she was watching those 3 groups, and then we swapped and that sort of thing. So we were always in touch with what was happening in the course, even if we weren't the primary instructor that
All right.
week.
So one option, there's parallel where we're both together, we're both deciding things at the same time. There's serial where it's a handoff. There's maybe I'm not using the right word, but compartmentalized, I'm going to say, where.
Specialized.
What's that?
Specialized.
Specialized, yeah. So where the TA might be in charge of a discussion area, but the lecture is taught by somebody else. And in some ways, that's what you're talking about, where if you're not primary this week, you're still involved in a secondary role, and next week you might be primary,
Primary,
and they would be
right.
secondary.
Mhm.
So the supportive. Are there other things, Eric?
I was thinking of like by module, so maybe
Mm-hmm.
one faculty was an expert in this module, and then on the next week or whenever, another would come in.
And that's how we determined who would do which week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there were certain things that I had a lot of experience in
Mhm.
that she hadn't done a lot of, and vice versa.
Mhm.
So if the modules are chronological, do this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, then that would be a serial example.
Oh.
But if it's a choose one of these different specializations and sort of choose your own adventure, choose your own path, that could be different types of teaching happening at the same time that still need to be designed together so that they fit, but also, that seems complicated.
Yeah, and like how do you handle facilitation for like ongoing discussion boards or long-running projects?
Right.
Who is going to be the primary one or stuff like that?
And in that case, it also fits into the idea of workload,
Right.
where
Yeah.
it's like, I'm just supposed to be teaching this percentage of it, but I'm involved every week because I have to check the discussion boards and that sort of
Yeah.
element. Michelle, your experience in the past 20 years has not all been super tech heavy. Has it changed?
It's a fair statement.
How has, what?
I've
what
never
have you-
taught an online class. Is that
Okay.
what you're thinking, John?
Well, or even the blended, where you have the learning management system 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah. No, that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Back in the old days. I'm trying to think about the technology and what that means for team teaching. In some ways, it can really help because having everything, for instance, on Canvas allows my teaching partner and I to always know what are the resources, whether she's posted them or I've posted them or it's a document we both worked on. We can all check that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really great. I think what's really important is that when you start out at the beginning of your course to have a really respectful but frank conversation with your teaching partner about what are your expectations for each other. Maybe come to some sort of formal agreement, if you will, especially if it's your first time with that teaching partner. And always think about the student view. So you know how you can do that in Canvas, you can click on the student view. What are the students seeing from our team as the semester goes on? Are we making it better for them because of our team teaching, or are we creating more challenges for them because of our team teaching?
You know, this is on a much smaller scale, but when I go to presentations, just little brown bag lunches, or the departments are giving presentations about what they're doing in my do it world, I'm always bothered when they overshare the podium. It's like this team wants to come and present something, so they've taken it to give everybody fair airtime. They've taken this 15-minute presentation and broken it up into 3 different chunks. And then they do this, so like 2 people are standing to the side while the one's talking, and then they do this awkward handoff, and then the other one comes up and goes, well, I guess I'll start talking. And they always do this, you know, it's like, that's where there's a diminishing return there. There's no value add to have the 3 voices there. It's like, give me one voice, someone who can carry me through the presentation cleanly. So yeah, and I'm sure the same thing happens. Pardon?
Sounds like one of those Oscars acceptance speeches. I don't know if you saw those. There were those 3 people trying to read off that landscape piece of A4, and it was a disaster.
Yeah, just like,
Yeah,
so
the last person,
I'll
it's
just
never
sit
fair for
down.
the last person anyway, because they get cut off.
Right.
Yeah. So, student-centered, and then to be able to deal with a lot of those things, we have agreements ahead of time, and I imagine there's a lot of iteration. Just having been in meetings with you and some of your colleagues, you guys spend a lot of time planning.
Yeah, I mean the teaching part's the easy part. We all know that. It's everything that goes on outside the classroom, that's where the real work is.
Do you have meetings, and I guess I can open this up for everybody, how often when you're team teaching, do you meet with the rest of the team? Is it face-to-face meetings? Are you using Zoom or some other video conference thing? Is a lot of it email? Is a lot of it now collaboration where you don't actually meet but you're working on the same Google Doc together? How is that changing, and what are the things that are helping and not helping as far as organizing and coordinating that?
We have done quite a bit through docs and email, with occasional phone calls and stuff like that, but it's mostly through docs. But both of us we're both technology language people, so you know, and if we're not on at the same time, commenting out on docs works for us. But I don't know that that's the same for other people who are maybe less technological. So.
In some ways, I'm the same with docs. I'm very happy using the comment feature to communicate back and forth and come up with solutions and comment on their comments and things like that.
I prefer that over email just because it's all in one place, whereas
Yeah.
the emails I have to sort. It's like, I know she said this somewhere. Wait, where is it? You know.
Yeah, the revision history in the docs is also another fabulous. I was just commenting today, I wish that I could link to specific emails in the docs, because I will get an email about something and I'll be like, where was that? And I have to go find my email now, and Outlook searching is terrible, in my opinion, not an official university position.
It's terrible.
But if I could just put a link to that email and then keep track of them in the document, that would really help me organize my life. But yeah, having one spot is, for me, it's really useful as well. Tim?
So, again, in our context, we have, a course that lots of instructors teach. So we have weekly meetings to kind of go through the week ahead, or at least the next 3. Because often our classes are Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we have an hour face to face to kind of talk through issues, talk through what's coming up, discuss ideas, and then on the tech side of it, to take us more day to day. If somebody has a classroom idea, they'll probably send it out by email. There'll be a repository of stuff in Box, in a named Box file. And the other thing we do is we have a Canvas, I guess, instance. Is that right? Is that the right term? And we call it a collaborative space. So if anyone wants to share a Canvas activity, like a quiz or something, they put it on there and other people can then import it
So you have a Canvas Sandbox,
Sandbox,
and
that'll
people,
do, yeah.
you just, it's kind of almost,
We call it the collaborative space. And there's one for the major kind of team talk courses. So everyone's there and they can share. They can upload, download, import, export, sorry.
So I think that's another option. I've tried to work in Canvas to make a collaborative space for several of the organizations that I'm involved in, and I've always found it's not quite there.
Yeah.
Like in theory, it's great because every instructor on campus has access to it. It's right there on their dashboard, right next to the other classes that they teach. So why not? It puts in Google Docs nicely. It shares well with other things. You can have discussion forums, even though they're not beautiful. It's a capability.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always, it'd be interesting to see what your collaborative space looks like.
It was
Does
the
anyone else
first
have-
time we did it was better.
Okay.
This semester not so much.
Oh, interesting. So it's getting worse.
Because it's clunky.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think people just have what they need. You know? But still, it's there as a resource if we need it.
And expectations are changing too.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of, the first time we do it, it's like, ooh, there's a possibility here. This is awesome. And then the second year is like, this again. Okay. Eric, in the online spaces that you're working in, what are some of the big challenges going to be that you anticipate?
Like I said, I think the grading consistency is one.
Right.
I'm really interested to hear kind of what are some of the subjects you work on, like in the planning meetings, because I feel like, for me, for like the designer perspective, getting buy-in and getting like approval to move forward. If you have a committee approach, how do you make a decision? We're going to have this objective or we're not. But that's not really the online world. But yeah, the online world, I think my biggest concern is probably the student perspective, just keeping grading consistent and who's going to actually facilitate the course. How do you determine that and at what points? I think that's the most difficult part.
So in the planning meetings that you do before your courses, how are those determined? Arm wrestling, thumb wrestling?
I mean, it depends on the. Oh, you mean the decisions?
Yeah.
I think we eventually reach it and somebody just decides. I mean, it just, that kind of happens. But I was going to talk about the grading a little.
Right.
Just, I mean, for pretty much every assignment there's a rubric.
Mm-hmm.
That's not foolproof,
Yeah.
of course, because everyone still interprets the rubric. And the way that we try to standardize that across instructors, very independent instructors. For the bigger assignments is we have samples that we all grade, and so we calibrate.
Oh, okay.
We see what our range is, and we discuss and then come to some middle agreement. So if I'm marking too hard, then I need to chill out a little.
About how many total students are you dealing with in that kind of a scenario?
In the whole, so
like in a
that
given
everybody-
course that has multiple instructors.
200 to 300.
200 to 300. Okay. Yeah. See, I have a smaller group than that, and so what we ended up doing, and I don't know how many students you're dealing with, was we said, okay, all of the flip grid assignments, I grade. All of this assignments, you grade. So that way, at least within, even though there were multiple flip grid assignments or multiple whatever assignments, we were consistent with whatever that style of assignment was, that it was always the same person grading it. But all of our students were pooled into one course. We weren't
Gotcha.
separate sections where I would have to go into her section in order to see her students' work. It was all one big.
And I've seen that with TA grading as well, where they'll say, okay, you grade the first 4 questions, you grade 5 through 10, you grade the next thing, and that way all of the students are graded the same for the first 4. They're graded
Right.
by different people, but consistent across the questions. And Lauren has another question. What about defining what each item in the rubric means and creating examples of answers that earn 5, 4, 3, etc. points? And that's both defining and, I'll say it, modeling. Show examples of, this is a paper that got 5, 3, 2, 4. Here's one that got 2, 1, 5, or 1, 3, whatever the different things are. And say, there are several models, both for the students, but also then for the instructors to sort of decide on ahead of time. I know Tim Hostian in microbiology has done this, where he gives his students these 3 papers and he says, what are, you know, how would you grade these? And he's actually researched this and it's kind of a fun thing.
I usually do
You've
that.
taken that, right?
I do.
We've done that as well.
do that. I only use two papers. I say it's a good one and a not so good one to my students, and it's usually before they peer review each other's, so they know how I'm grading them.
Yeah.
And they then get to think about how their peers' paper might get graded, so they can think about how to.
And that gets into the team teaching, Cliff.
Yay!
From peers, from students. Good. So yeah, models I think are another good way to do that.
I think it's also helpful to let them know who is grading said assignments. So another course I TA for, we split grading duties, and the instructor will end up getting emails of stuff I graded, which she in turn thankfully turns it back to me. That way at least I don't feel like undercut if she changes it, or she reads through it, has a suggestion, and will always ask me as well. So that's been a good experience.
Well, and it brings up the point of admin duties again. Who's responsible for 1 through 4, 5 through whatever, and one, how do you communicate that to the students, but then 2, for the students who don't pay attention to the directions that are very clear, why don't they read this? How do you deal with that and say, oh, Michelle, can you handle this one? I'll take the next one. Or how's that day-to-day administration feedback from students, etc.? If you get an email from a student complaining, which of the team is willing to and able to speak for the teaching team? Is it just CC'd so that it's twice as much work for everybody? Do you both answer individually, or 3 of you, or 5 of you, or how is that handled?
I think it's based on the assessment too. You know, if it is an assignment that has clear components where it is okay to split up the grading, that's different from, say, a research paper. That you can't divide up for the same piece of work among different instructors. So we have what we call norming sessions, which is what you've all been talking about, where the same document is passed among the TAs, and we all independently decide what it should earn and why, and then we have a discussion about that and come to a consensus. And that's an ongoing process, and that's a crucial part of a TA training. They're training as a professional to do that. But at some point, you've got to have someone who has the final say, you know, and it depends on the makeup of your team too. Are they peers? Are they, you know, faculty in training? Are they undergraduate TAs?
Is that part of that initial conversations and agreement?
It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You know, that kind of, so I've a couple of different times been invited to be part of editorial boards for papers, magazines, whatever. And it kind of reminds me of that process, because I didn't know this at the beginning, but when they send out somebody's paper, they're not just sending me that paper, they've sent it to 1 or 2 other people to edit also. And I was really uncomfortable. I'm like, I don't know if I'm really the right person to read this, if I, you know. And as it turned out, the feedback that I was giving was very similar to the feedback that somebody else was giving, and I was told by the head editor person, you are the right person because you're the readership for this particular journal, and your feedback isn't that much different from what we're getting elsewhere. And I was like, oh, okay. So
Very reassuring.
Yeah, because I felt like, you know, who am I to say that this person who's apparently been researching such and such doesn't know what they're talking about?
I've never had to do it. I've always feared writing style. I just don't like the style. That's why I'm glad I don't have to worry about it. It's like, you know, the factual, structural, and just a good research paper is one thing, but if there's a style or something that I just don't, it's just not striking my nerve, I'd be very hard pressed to remain objective to that.
Well, and this is actually probably a thing that is a big part of that norming process, where a paper that I might be like, oh, have you noticed all of the double spaces after punctuation? It's a terrible paper. Other people might say, you know, John, just let that go and look at the content rather than that punctuation. And, you know, we all need sort of those reminders that there's more to a body of work than our own perspectives or.
Once you've dropped your third New York Times bestseller and you open up your own writing class,
Right.
you know, then you can start exerting that power.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably a process too, because when you first start working with somebody else, you've got to learn all of that, and you've got to deal with that sort of, here's a new social/professional situation that I'm in right now. Part of that act that Margaret was talking about, where we have to sort of understand each other ahead of time. All right.
Administrative question. Does FERPA ever fit into this? Are we ever talking about things where an instructor is not technically attached to the class and you're inviting them to be part of it? Is there like a FERPA concern that, or is there some way to protect yourself? I mean, you know, there's lots of talk, right? That instructors shouldn't just be added willy-nilly to anybody's course, right?
So Cliff, FERPA, what would be the violation of having, that would be no different than having a guest speaker have access to your students.
Well, but that's actually been part of the concern with the registrar's office as campuses come out. They've begun to really tighten that up, that like instructors can no longer just willy-nilly invite somebody into a Canvas course. They have to go through a vetting process to do that, and part of that is to satisfy the FERPA concerns. So in case like, at least if I heard what you were saying, you were indicating you were both teaching your courses, but you were going to maybe possibly pool them together and teach them at the same time. Did you say that? Is that the scenario? Okay.
No, I'd say I'd like to do that.
Okay, but I was saying, that was what my brain was
Yeah.
wrapping around. I was like, so wait, is that legal? Can you do that? I mean, are you allowed to see somebody else's roster and grades of their classes?
And that's your question, right? It's like, what is the process
Yeah.
for getting
If
a
If
team
two
teaching?
instructors are listed in CIS as instructors, then I'm sure that's a safeguard. But just, can I just invite any faculty member into my course to help me? It may make for a good thing, but is there a FERPA?
So I think in that case, as far as Canvas goes, you can assign them a role that doesn't allow them to view certain parts of Canvas.
Certain grades, okay.
Like grades, for example,
Great.
and so then you're okay, I would think,
Well,
because
see,
you're,
and
the
you
idea
know,
is you're
it's
not sharing.
You're not okay, because what
They're
you're
still
giving them is
enrollment.
access to the enrollment.
Say.
FERPA protects the names of students
Oh, the
who are
names of students
enrolled.
too, right?
But industry wise, as far as just the Canvas course, contributing content, there might be a role that I could grant somebody that lets them throw stuff in and be an editor of my content without seeing
the whole,
name, the
right.
students page, or the people page. But if you're talking about actually coming into the classroom, it's like, well, boom, I
That's-
now see all of you taking
right.
notes. And trust me, I'm not like a big FERPA warrior, because I think sometimes there's so much overkill and there's like, but just from a legal exposure standpoint.
That's
And
a good
Cliff, do
point.
the instructors, because I'm new here, do faculty and instructors have to take, I know whenever I work in the hospital for anything, I've got to do HIPAA training, right?
Mhm.
Even though there's probably no chance in the world I'll ever need
yeah.
to apply that. But even designing training for a hospital, you gotta make sure you're not using names or, you know, all these
Sure.
things. So is there a compliance or regulatory requirement for people to get access as an instructor to Canvas? And if there's not, should there be, to cover the FERPA requirements?
That's a great question for the ROs,
Yeah,
because that's a great question.
Never done FERPA.
And I don't think there is. I mean, we have been kind of pestering them for, hey, can you give us a link to a FERPA thing? Because when we do our Canvas sub-account admin training, these are people who are gonna have a lot of power, and like, we would love to get them checked off the FERPA list.
And I would think the provost office or somebody on campus would actually initiate and make that a requirement if it were a priority. It should be a priority because FERPA is a big deal, and, you know, until you're sued.
Margaret for provost.
Well, no, please, don't do that.
But yeah, it's like, but I agree, it's like.
But I think, you know, until you see some lawsuits, I mean, that's what drives compliance training is
Yeah.
litigation.
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't
Well,
have the answer.
And the problem that I see is that then they start locking things down so tightly that legitimate
Oh, yeah.
needs can't be met.
Oh, yeah.
I'm dealing with that
Social-
right now because I have somebody from Madison College that's gonna be a presenter for a retreat that I'm having, which is all language educators, not students, but I've created the course in Canvas, and she doesn't have a login in the UW system, and so I can't get her into my course.
I mean, there is a legal way, there's a process for requesting that, but it's like you need to initiate. I think it's sort of the FERPA, you're creating a FERPA trail of like, okay, if they abuse something,
Right.
who are you to be creating an access to
So,
it?
yeah, I just found out I can do a person of interest, whatever the heck that is.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how to do that.
Sounds like a criminal
Right,
investigation.
it does.
The social work, the school social work over here, they were kind of our biggest challenge because they hire a lot of social workers for kind of short term or
Mhm.
like assistant professorship roles where they just come and teach a semester. But they don't accept until like 2 weeks before classes start. And they don't have access to the course, they can't get into the Canvas space. So, and the process for us giving them the credential is like, it's kind of a lengthy deal, and they're like, hey, my class starts in 4 days.
This is
like
one,
getting into my Canvas.
one version of sort of the team teaching, like how do we deal with the short term, the very short term members of the team who might only be here for a moment or two. I know in Blackboard Collaborate, you can invite them in as guests and they don't then have access to the whole Canvas course. So they wouldn't have all of that, but they still would be able to see who's in your course, and when other people are signing in, they'd be able to see their names. So there's, in some ways, the more regulations there are, the more it flies counter to the idea of can we provide authentic experiences for our students. So if we want to invite folks from the community in, Wisconsin experience, intellectual, community engagement, purposeful action, all of this stuff, this is all very much part of what we want to do.
But we're gonna lock you out so you can't.
Yeah.
So there are ways, to do this, but it raises a question of how do we do that? What are the easy ways?
You have to wear this blindfold.
Blackboard, right.
And stand on your head and.
Basically. So,
Alright. We have 12 minutes left. Are there other things that we talk about? Tech coordination we talked about a little bit. Using the Google Docs and email, the whole video face-to-face Canvas, Sandbox. Should we talk about sort of the power struggle of
Yes.
being in a team?
I
Is
think we
there-
could talk about a lot of different conflicts. I mean, I think conflict management in team teaching is a real question and something that should be addressed. I think you had said it, that you want to have a very frank conversation about who's the lead on this topic and who's sort of who's the leader, who's the secondary, who's going to go around the class. Depending on the topic, somebody might roam the room and monitor the discussion or some online software training or whatever. And if you're in Canvas, you want someone to be the main go-to. And you need to communicate those roles to the students so that they understand who is sort of the assistant. I've worked a lot in corporate training where we have subject matter experts on exciting things like accounting or things that are hard to train. And so we have a lot of subject matter experts, but they're not trainers.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to get those two people in a room together. So you have the expert and then you have the instructional expert. And you try to work that together. But you gotta share that with your target audience so they know why. If someone asks me about investments or something, I'm going to say, let me defer to the expert, and I can say that gracefully, and they'll accept it because we've already told them I'm not the expert. So defining those roles.
And it's more than that because you're also modeling to the students that this is the thing that I know, this is the thing that I don't know, this is the thing you should ask Lauren about, this is the thing you should ask Kenny about, and I think that's again
the
a
ground
fantastic
rules,
thing
yeah.
for students to sort of see so that they don't always feel like they need to be the experts when they. And that's a big thing. Logistics and energy team teaching versus tradition. We talked a little bit about that, and we get into sort of the legal side of that.
Would it be alright if we riffed a little longer on the conflict or understanding
Yeah,
conflict?
I'm sorry.
I had a quick question, which would be, I guess, how do you effectively communicate your feelings about conflict without having the negative implications of, oh, you're being emotional or easily offended about something someone else did, and keeping it professional, I suppose, without having a lot of the negative side effects?
Yeah.
That's such a good question. I think it's always important to acknowledge that whenever anyone feels strongly about something, even something that you disagree with, there's a good reason they feel strongly about it. And to put that out there first and say, I understand that that's important to you, but here's what I'm thinking as well. And always drawing the conversation back to what we have in common. And the great thing about teaching is that no matter what teaching partners you all have the students in common. So if we can always refocus the conversation back to what's best to do for our students, not for us, but what's best for our students, I think that usually you can get folks to agree on that.
Boy, there are.
Yeah, the student-centered perspective again, good.
And there are just books written about how you open conversation. If you anticipate there's going to be conflict, what to say, what not to say to kind of get them ready. And model it well and make sure you respond well. Ask for criticism, ask for critique. So what did you think? Did I do you right? So let them know you're safe and you're input, you're part of it. But that's
Margaret.
conflict is just
Yeah, I was gonna just build on what was said already, and that is, it's great you have your team teaching, but anywhere when you've got a team, you really, you wanna give good feedback, but it's good to start with the I statement, which you had mentioned. No, we start with I statements. I feel like, you might say, well, I feel like we're just not clicking and I'm not sure what it is, even though you may think you know what it is. Just ask that question very gently, and, so using I statements, but then what Cliff had mentioned is great because you could sort of lead into the discussion and say, hey, how did I do with that? I wondered if I was doing this okay or that okay, and just to open the door to dialogue. And then as your colleague maybe gives you feedback, then say to them, okay, I appreciate that. Ask the question somewhat benignly, hey, how do you feel about that piece? Are you comfortable with that? I thought maybe we could add this component, but it's after you've sort of introduced the dialogue.
And let me sort of restate what I'm hearing from that. If you establish a culture of discussion and conversation, even at the, what did you think today about what happened? And this becomes part of the regular routine, then when these things come up, they won't be weird, they won't be awkward. They'll just be part of what we always do afterwards.
And I think it's important.
And I imagine after 20 years, you've got that down to a...
Well, it depends. There's always new folks coming into teams and moving out. So, but you're right. I think modeling that culture is so important.
I think you want them to know that you've got their back.
Yes.
And when you have that kind of trust and rapport built with your colleagues, hey, I've got your back, then they've got yours. And then you can have those discussions. John and I often after these classes will have a conversation about what do you think, what went well. And I know that he's expecting me to be honest with him about, hey, what happened there? How can we do that better? It's because we have the shared goals that was mentioned earlier.
I love when people give me bad feedback or constructive feedback.
cool.
And it's true, you put them on the green sheets. There's also a thing though to be aware of, and I think part of that student perspective, universal design for learning suggests multiple ways. So if I get it stuck in my head like, oh, we need to do it this way, and somebody says, oh, what about this other way? It's not a one way or the other way. Is there a way for us to offer a choice so that students can see multiple perspectives, so that they have two pathways that they can choose, but both of them will move them forward to the next point where we want them to go. And that's part of that being accountable as a member of the team to not only seeing the things that you see, but to be open to other perspectives and other ways of moving forward. Lauren online, are there any other questions that you would like to see? If so, add them in there. That'd be great. Otherwise, we have 5 minutes left. Are there any last things we should talk about before we close up?
I'd love to know, what disasters have you experienced that you came back from?
Oh, this will be good.
Oh, man.
Car wreck
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that everything is always, roses and butterflies, because it's not.
Roses have thorns.
Aw. I think I have learned that most of the decisions I've made when I'm upset are bad decisions.
Okay.
So I have learned that a cooling off period is always a good idea for me as well as for most other people before an important decision is made.
Mm-hmm.
If that helps at all. But I think every disaster is a teachable moment too,
Right.
just like we tell our students. And it's good to learn from mistakes.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking if there were mistakes you had already learned from so that we don't make them and we can learn from our own different mistakes, that would be.
Something I've experienced with my team taught class is that there hasn't really been a clear vision of what it should, like, difficulty level of the course for the students.
Okay.
So it's a 100 level class, and when it comes to exam times, there is a very clear difference between instructor A's questions being very easy to instructor B's questions being very difficult and, really testing your knowledge. So I think early conversations, finding out and being clear, like, what level do you want this class to be?
Where instructor A says, no, we need to filter people out of this, and instructor B is, no, we need to support everybody to succeed. You've got two different agendas going there,
Right.
and it can be, feels schizophrenic for the students. Again, bringing it back to that student perspective, what does this feel like to them?
And it's come to a point, like, in my position as the TA, like, I want to be clear with them, like, instructor A's questions are going to be very definition based and just memorization. Instructor B, you really need to kind of dig into this knowledge and make sure you know who was teaching what
That puts you in
lecture.
a really difficult position, doesn't
It
it?
does.
Yes.
And you weren't part of that initial conversation, were you?
No.
Mhm.
Good teacher, bad teacher. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
love Tuesdays. Oh, I can't stand it.
I think if you're invited to be part of a teaching team, try to avoid teams where it truly is a relay. Where as soon as someone passes the baton off, they're never on the track again. Think of it more like those World Wrestling Federation tag team.
Interesting. Keep
Where
going.
my dad used to watch horrible wrestling, but the partner
It's
ones
okay.
were always interesting because there'd be the person in the ring wrestling, and they would get tired, and then they would just, exit the ring and tag their partner, and the partner would go in, but the partner was always ready.
Yeah.
The partner was always watching closely and knew what was going on, was studying the opponent, so they were always ready to come in.
Referring to the script.
We always called it a tag team, and I didn't know where that originated, but now I have this image, and it's
Yeah.
completely fitting for the experience.
So avoid relay teams, join tag teams.
And relay teams often will also encourage the idea of compartmentalized learning, where we learn this and I never look back at it again. Now I'm on to instructor B, doing instructor B stuff, and we move on past that. And the best learning for the students, again, back to the student-centered, is this distributed, where we keep going back and revisiting past things. And Lauren has a question online. All right, it is, with the cooling off period, I think it is important for everyone on the teaching team to understand that people need this time to reflect on the situation. She was in a situation where a co-teacher did not respect the cooling off period, and it only exacerbated the problem. So talk about how the team will deal with conflict when you are designing the class. And so we're in that early stage. It's part of making that the agreement that we talked about in those early conversations. All right, we are out of time. Thank you for coming. If you could just drop off this little green sheet with a couple of check boxes in the top compartment here, that would be awesome. You can have one. Thank you. Put the other ones away. Oh, grab two. And thank you again. This is sort of a interesting, fun topic, and I think that we're going to see more and more of that, because I think that as the classrooms open up, and we design